Hi, thanks for tuning in to the Watchful News. My name is Tyrone Smith, and I will be your host for today. Today, we're going to be talking about a man who changed the course of history, Dr. Martin Luther King. Today, I have joining me on the show, Mrs. Bobbie Johnson.
Good morning, Tyrone. We just want to pause right now and for the next 20 minutes or so and to talk about the legacy of Dr. King, not so much of his death, but his legacy, his life, the power that he effected in the minds of America. I've been collecting Dr. King memorabilia, his speeches and his cassettes, his video cassettes, his anything written or spoken by him since I was 7th or 8th grade. I remember coming home from school when I was in the elementary school and seeing his picture on the news and watching him march and seeing how the people were so enthralled in his melodic tone and his inspiring words. He had kind of a rhythm when he spoke. Listen at the speech from Street Sweeper.
The great challenge that we face is to be ready to enter these doors when they open. Ralph Waldo Emerson said in a lecture back in 1871 that if a man can write a better book, or preach a better sermon, or make a better mousetrap than his neighbor, even if he builds his house in the woods, the world will make a beaten path to his door. This will become increasingly true. Now it means that we're going to have to work hard. We're going to have to burn the midnight oil sometime. We're going to have to take advantage of new opportunities. But we must set out to do our life's work so well that nobody could do it better. We must set out to do a good job. And we must not seek merely to do a good Negro job. If you were setting out to be merely a good Negro doctor, or a good Negro lawyer, a good Negro teacher, a good Negro preacher, or a good Negro skilled laborer, a good Negro barber, a good Negro beautician, you have already flunked your matriculation exam for entrance into the University of Integration. We must get ready. We must set out to do a good job, and to do that job so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn couldn't do it better. As I've said so often, if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, go on out and sweep streets like Michelangelo carved marble. Sweep streets like Raphael painted pictures. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music and like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well. This is it. If you can't be a pine on the top of the hill, be a scrub in the valley, but be the best little scrub on the side of the rill. Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be the sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or you fail. Be the best of whatever you are.
Okay, Bobbie, what made you select that particular speech?
Because in my opinion, Street Sweeper spoke to the African American in that day and time, because most of them were doing street sweeper type jobs. They were garbage collectors, custodians, janitors. They were operating the elevators when the elevators would go up and down at the hospitals and in the government buildings. And if they worked in the restaurant, they were dishwashers and cooks. So when Dr. King uttered the words to street sweeper, he actually pulled the heartstrings of the black community. They could really understand what he meant. And he knew that they were talking to them. Because Dr. King was saying, in essence, you don't have a place to hide now. You have to bring excellence to the job. You're not going to find it on the job, but you have to bring it to the job. he says new opportunities will be opening to Negroes, meaning that a movement is going to take place. Changes are going to take place, and you got to be ready to meet the challenges and the changes that's getting ready to happen in the United States and abroad.
If Martin Luther King was living today, what do you think his message would be to the African American leadership of this day?
I think the message would be the same, that it's incumbent upon you to be the best leader you can be, the best doctor. And somewhere in the speech it says, if you're setting out to be merely a good Negro doctor, or Negro lawyer, or a good Negro school teacher, he's saying that in that day and time, the job that Negroes did or the education that Negroes received was thought to be inferior to what other races receive. So he's saying that it's no longer good enough for you to be just a Negro lawyer, because that carries with it a connotation that your standards don't measure up to the white lawyer or the white doctor. So you've got to get away from mediocrity.
Okay. Now, Martin Luther King was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929, and he attended Morehouse College. Am I correct?
Right.
What do you think sparked his drive to make change?
Okay, when he left Morehouse, he went on to Boston University and Crozier University, where he studied philosophy, and he became acquainted with the teaching of Gandhi and his nonviolent affirmation for social change and social injustice. And King became infatuated, so to speak, very interested in this nonviolent approach to civil rights.
Now, when Rosa Parks refused to sit in the back of the bus, that's what really triggered the different protesters and the movements, coupled with Greensboro, North Carolina, with the Woolworths experience, right?
Okay, Rosa Parks, not knowing King or not knowing how her life and Dr. King's life would one day meet and just get intertwined, interwoven together. She was some sort of a visionary. She knew that what she was seeing in America was not the ideal that the Constitution writers had in mind. And when she refused to give up her seat, she was saying to the white people, you may not know it or not, you may not see it, but you and I are one with each other. She was exercising what you call God consciousness, meaning that universally we are related. Universally we are one. So when she refused to give up her seat, she's saying, no, I'm not going to get up because I'm one with all of you.
So you're speaking from a spiritual perspective.
You have to go there to get the real meaning of what the movement was about. You know, the movement started in the church because Dr. King had deep roots in the Baptist faith, and he took that philosophy, that social climate, and he put that in the context of religion. Somewhere it says in the Bible, do not envy the oppressor, envy not thou the oppressor, because if you do, you will surely copy his ways. So he was trying to teach black people the concept of love. And in his speech he says, if you can't be a pine on the top of a hill, then be a shrub in the valley. In other words, there's nowhere for you to hide. There's no excuse for you not to be your best. And then he says to sweep streets like Michelangelo carved marble, Raphael painted pictures, Beethoven composed music, and Shakespeare wrote poetry. He is saying the best of the best. He picked the best in class, the best sculptor, Michelangelo. Remember, he carved the portrait of the life-size portrait of David. Shakespeare is synonymous with poetry. Beethoven is synonymous with music. So Dr. King said, you've got to rise up to a Beethoven standard of sweeping streets. You've got to bring on a Shakespeare mentality when you do your job.
Looking at the disparity within the African American community right now, because as a culture we're earning in the billions, but we're not circulating our dollars back into the community. With all of the messages and the speeches that Dr. King gave and the mission that he set upon, not only to change the mindset from the broader community, what do you think is causing the problems in the African American community now?
I think a lot of times your progressive, affluent African Americans lose contact with the have-nots. And your affluent, rich African Americans have put distance between themselves and the black ghettos. And from day to day, they go about trying to maintain what they have, and they lose contact or they lose focus on the flourishing ghettos. I've been looking at that for some time, and I really don't know where the actual problem lies. I don't know what gives birth to that type of situation. But take me, for instance, I go to work, I eat lunch, I go home, watch TV, cook supper, and I go to bed. I'm not constantly faced with people with the ghetto. And that's no excuse, but that's just a reality. So sometimes we just forget. A lot of Dr. King's words have just been lost in the trek from the ghetto to the suburbs. The battle is not as hot as it was in the 60s and 70s, and we've just relaxed, and we recline at night, and we say our little 3-minute prayers, and all is well with our little world.
Okay. Going back to Dr. King, street sweepers, what group was he speaking to at that time?
He was speaking to your garbage collectors, your maids, your beauticians, your actual street sweepers. He was speaking to the cooks, the people who stood up all day and ironed, and people who washed and folded clothes, people who did the menial servant type jobs. He was actually speaking to them. He was giving them their responsibility. Just because you are a maid doesn't mean that you shouldn't do that job the best of your ability. Because you have to take the mindset has to take place on the job before you can be promoted to another job. In other words, the ghetto has to raise their level of thinking before they can move into the suburbs.
Do you think that's a state of mind?
It's all a state of mind.
The ghetto, the whole concept of living in the ghetto.
It's a state of mind. I don't know why they label it the ghetto. And I think the ghetto mentality really puts the people that live there in a bad light. Because I used to live in the projects, and now the projects has been relegated to the ghetto. And it's because of the state of mind or the constant theory of lack that exists in the ghetto. It's hard to break free of those chains that bind you once you get relegated to the ghetto.
Now in the scripture it says that we can all be transformed in a twinkling of an eye. And if that be the case, what do you think it will take in order to change?
See, the scripture is talking about a spiritual transformation. What we talk about on earth is a physical or mental transformation. It's not the same.
But Jesus said he was in the world but not of it.
Right. A lot of people are in the ghetto, but they don't have the ghetto mentality. And at some point, those people rise above the ghetto.
That's my point. So what do you think it's going to take to elevate that mindset from the ghetto mentality to having the faith and the belief that you can accomplish whatever you want?
It's going to take patience. It's going to take a reality check. It's going to take some gut-wrenching transformation, some gut-wrenching reality for us to change the mindset of the people in the ghetto. First of all, they have to want it. They have to know, they have to be exposed to the fact that there's life beyond the ghetto, that I can overcome this ghetto, that I can be in this ghetto, but this ghetto does not have to be in me.
Now, going back to Martin Luther King, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964.
Yes, but that was not uppermost in King's mind. Even though he won the Nobel Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, the black community was still in utter turmoil. I think they wanted to recognize him for his efforts, and they needed to be applauded.
Now, before the civil rights movement, years ago, African Americans, we used to have our own businesses. With integration and a lot of African Americans wanting to basically integrate with larger corporations to have the opportunity to work within those large organizations, do you think, in a sense, that may have affected the African American community in terms of leaving your mom and pop stores and going to work for larger corporations?
Well, Tyrone, that had to happen because the larger corporations were going to compete us out. So that was inevitable. But at the same time, when you leave your mom and pop business and go with the larger corporation, you should be able to string those small businesses along in some shape, form, or fashion. Not just forget about them altogether, because they are the heart of your community. Some kind of ways you should be able to feed back into that community so that those little businesses would thrive. I remember when we were living in the projects, this black man had opened a dry goods store where you sold jeans and work shirts and overalls. But his product, his goods, was so much more expensive than what you could get from the white merchant. And I remember the black people patronizing the white merchant because his goods were cheaper. And this, what do you think happened to this black man? He went out of business. He couldn't stay in business because, but what we didn't understand was he had to sell his goods at a higher price because he only had one store. Whereas the white merchants could afford to sell at a lower price because they had several stores. And we have to start somewhere, even if it means I've got to pay more for that pair of jeans. And if I support this business in the long run, this black merchant will be able to open up another store and another store, and inevitably his price will be able to be lowered just like the white merchant. But you gotta persevere, you gotta start somewhere, and that's a concept that a lot of us just do not understand.
What would you suggest an individual to do in order to step out of the ways of mediocrity?
He's got to understand it first. A lot of times we don't understand mediocrity. Mediocrity exists because we refuse to be our best. You've got to find something that inspires you, something that gets you up in the morning, something that keeps you up at night, searching and digging and looking and trying to find the answer. And sometimes God's word is the best place to look. But you gotta be thirsty. You gotta be hungry. Les Brown said you gotta be hungry if you're going to ever be fed.
Now, Martin Luther King, he was married to Coretta Scott King?
Yes.
And had 4 children?
4 little girls. I remember he tells a story in one of his tapes where his little daughter wanted to go to Funtown, but Funtown was not integrated at the time. And he kept evading the issue, but one day she backed him into a corner, and he had to explain to her that one day she would be able to go to Funtown, but just not now. Because he knew that that age was coming. He knew that that time was coming. But just the way that he handled certain issues, he never left an issue at a low point. He always raised it to a higher level and gave you the big picture. And that's what we have to do with our lives and with ourselves, is to see how we fit in the big scheme of things, because we're all connected with something bigger than ourselves.
What do you think? I know the gist of this conversation is talking about the street sweepers speech that Dr. King gave years ago. What do you think gave him the inspiration and the drive to do the I Have a Dream speech?
Because he could see beyond the street sweeper. He could see a time when America would not even look like it looked to him right then. He could see beyond the turmoil. He could see beyond the violence, beyond the prejudice, beyond the racial injustice. He could see the quiet beyond the storm. He could see America when all the pieces fell together and everybody would be doing their best to live in racial harmony, racial justice, and would have that racial pride.
If Dr. King was alive today, do you think he would feel that what he saw and what he believed is manifesting today?
He would see some of it. He would see where somebody had a dream also. He could see that he was not the only one dreaming, but then he could see where some people never woke up. Some are still asleep. And to be asleep is a choice. To dream is a delight. He would see it just a conglomeration of things. But I think overall he would be pleased with what he saw to a certain degree.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience as part of the Street Sweepers message?
Okay, he says that, he quotes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, said in a lecture back in 1871, if a man can write a better book, preach a better sermon, or make a better mousetrap than his neighbor, even if he builds his house in the woods, the world will make a beaten path to his door. Dr. King was saying, if you just get in there and be your best, get your trademark, be known for doing things with excellence, and people will seek you out. You will be a sought-out individual when your trademark is excellent. Whatever you do, if you do that to the best of your ability, then you will be known for that, and people will seek you out. If they want somebody to build a bridge and you position yourself as a master builder, people will seek you out. You can't get away. You can't go far enough in the woods for people not to seek you out and pay you for whatever you want to charge for your services.
If a person wanted to get the contents of that speech in its entirety, how could they go about doing it?
They could search Dr. King's website. He has just speech after speech after speech, sermon after sermon on his website. Just look for drking.com or Speeches by Martin Luther King, and they're there. Let's listen at this speech from Dr. King where he talks about a better way.
Rather than racial integration, I understand their response. I have analyzed it psychologically and I understand it. But in spite of the fact that I understand it, I must say to them in patient terms that that isn't the way. I must say to them in patient terms that black supremacy is as dangerous as white supremacy. And God is not interested merely. God is not interested merely in the freedom of black men and brown men and yellow men, but God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race and the creation of a society where all men will live together as brothers. No, we need not hate. We need not use violence. That is another way. A way as old as the insights of Jesus of Nazareth. As modern as the techniques of Mohandas K. Gandhi. That is another way. A way as old as Jesus saying, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Pray for them that despitefully use them. And as modern as Gandhi saying through Thoreau, non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. That is another way. A way as old as Jesus saying, turn the other cheek. And when he said that, he realized that turning the other cheek might bring suffering sometime. He realized that it may get you home bombed sometime. He realized that it may get you stabbed sometime. He realized that it may get you scarred up sometime. But he was saying in substance that it is better to go through life with a scarred up body than a scarred up soul. That is another way. This is what we're about to see. No, that is a power in this way. And if we will follow this way, we will be the participants in a great building process that will make America a new nation. And we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. This is our challenge. This is the way we must grapple with this dilemma. And we will be a great people. And let us have faith in the future. I know it's dark sometimes. And I know all of us begin to ask, how long will we have to live with this system? I know all of us are asking, how long will prejudice blind divisions of men, and darken their understanding and drive bright-eyed wisdom from her sacred throne? When will wounded justice, lying prostrate on the streets of our cities, be lifted from this dust of shame to reign supreme among the children of men? Yes, when will the radiant star of hope be plunged against the nocturnal bosom of this lonely night, and plucked from weary souls the manacles of death and the chains of fear? How long will justice be crucified and truth buried? How long? I can only answer this evening, not long.
Wow, it's phenomenal when you hear his message and the way his voice resonates. It can't do nothing but inspire you.
He actually just breathes life into the words that he says. And you know by his reputation and his legacy that he feels those words, he lives them, and he means them, and he believes in those words. When he says there's got to be a better way. He's saying that love is the better way. He was trying to teach America, the black people, that the weapon you need to use to bring about racial equality is the weapon of love. Not guns and knives and fighting, but love. And that was a new mindset for the black militant. That was a whole new way of thinking. But you know, Einstein says that you cannot solve a problem at the same level of thinking in which the problem was created. And Dr. King knew that, so he was trying to get us to just look at what's going on. And he said that somewhere violence begets violence. So you're not going to solve anything by fighting.
So you think it's more importantly to respond rather than to react?
Yes, you got to be proactive. And his proactive weapon was love. When he says, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men? He knew that prejudice clouds your understanding. It clouds your judgment. So as long as you march into the courtroom and the decision that the judges make is clouded by prejudice, then justice will never be served. He said that when we're wounded, justice that's lying prostrate on the streets of our cities be lifted from this dust of shame to reign supreme among the children of men. He's saying that the courts have done justice so wrong that justice has ran out of the courtroom and she's lying prostrate on the streets. And Dr. King is wondering how long is this situation is going to go on.
Bobbie, any closing remarks?
I would just like for people to relish in Dr. King's day, to reminisce and find someone to talk about his legacy with. Find someone to discuss the meaning of his words and just see where you can find yourself in his march, in his fight for freedom. See where you can find yourself carrying this weapon of love.
With that in mind, we thank you for tuning in to the Watchful News, and want to remind you that on January the 16th, 2006, will be the celebration of King Day. So please take time out of your schedule to give homage to a man that changed the course of history. Thanks for tuning in to the Watchful News.